everybody, and thank you for joining us. I am Barbara Gago, the founder and CEO at Pando. Pando is a performance platform designed to increase talent density through continuous performance calibration. I'm here with Marieke Pepers. She's the Chief People Officer at Nmbrs, a Dutch-based payroll company. She spent her career as a people leader implementing a lot of progressive people practices. Marieke, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
We're excited to have you today. We're going to talk some philosophical kind of approaches, but also tactical to two programs that you've implemented at Nmbrs. One of them being a no manager or few manager practice, as well as a 4-day work week. I think it's really interesting because recently there's been a lot of companies who have done a lot of reorgs and reduction of headcount and trying to figure out how to operate and move more efficiently. And a lot of that focus has been on middle management and removing management layers. And even recently, Bill Gates predicted that within the next 10 years, I think, maybe for a different reason, but due to AI, we're going to be down to a 2-day work week. So you're definitely on the, let's say, bleeding edge and ahead of your time in this sense. But a lot of organizations are really thinking about how do we move quicker? How do we reduce spend? How do we operate more efficiently? And so these two approaches seem like they're top of mind for everybody, either because they're trying to be proactive or they're being reactive in how they're adapting to the market and different situations and trends that are happening. So I really want to, maybe we can start with the manager side, because having no managers or few managers or a flat organization is definitely something that I've heard a lot of startups strive for. And I'm curious, what's your philosophy personally at Nmbrs, and also how did the thinking evolve to that?
Yeah. Yeah, I think we had the opportunity when we started that we could design the organization. So I had a founder was there and he was just attracting people that knew better about bookkeeping or about DevOps. He was just hiring professionals and then felt like, why should there be a manager in between? As long as I'm there, as long as we are small, I don't need this extra layer.
Yeah.
And then upon growth, and when we really started to design the organization, we also couldn't fit in that manager anymore. We couldn't see where we would take out leadership from professionals that were doing their job, that knew what needs to be done, that owned what needs to be done. Where, we couldn't make that manager fit in. And so from that, we started to build the organization without managers.
Around what size do you think that you made like the intentional decision to not have managers?
Yeah, that was when we were with 50 people.
Okay.
And we had we have 2 offices, one in Amsterdam, one in Lisbon, with developers in Lisbon. And also they were hired to do their job. And we felt like, they know what needs to be done. I'm not a developer. I have no clue.
Yeah.
I can tell them what I want and what I need. So then we decided to not ever hire a manager.
Right. So it's similar. I mean, it is that inflection point when companies are going to start adding layers to an organization and you decided to keep the layers out. And I think it's interesting because the manager role has been under a lot of scrutiny recently. And I think part of it is how we thought about managers before. It was very much the thing that you grew into or up to, or how you climbed the ladder to get into that position. And so that was really the only career path that many people had. So it was, of course, they wanted to be a manager, even if they didn't have the skills or even if they didn't even want to do it, but at least that was the path they had to make more money. And so how do you think about, because it sounds like you lean into more individual contributors. So does that career path then just continue for them? Can they continue to earn more compensation similar to a manager would, even though they're in an individual contributor role? Or how does that kind of work?
Yeah, we don't have this manager role, so I would not know what their salary would have been.
Okay.
That's also an answer, and they also don't. We have some people that left the organization because they felt they outgrown their role and they go elsewhere to actually become a manager and then come back because they really see how they indeed in their role can be a mentor, can be an expert, can be a specialist, but don't want to tell others what to do.
Interesting.
And so people come back because they really like to be that professional player, being able to make decisions, but yeah, with some consent with colleagues and not because they are the manager and they can.
My husband and I talk about this a lot over the dinner table. He's an engineer and spent his career as an engineer and has a kind of visceral reaction to what you're saying, and that a lot of the dynamic between managers and their reports are like it's us and them, or it's I'm the boss, or I have this power that you don't have. And that's an unhealthy dynamic anyway. I think there's definitely a trend towards, at least in more progressive organizations that do still have managers, to have these parallel paths, which it sounds like you don't have at all, but where an individual contributor might make the same amount as a manager at their level, so that you start to change kind of the idea of what a manager is. It's not a better role, but a different role. And then that role obviously serves some kind of purpose. And you don't have managers at all, right? Zero?
We have 3 people in the management team.
The executives.
Yeah.
So is that like founders plus you?
Yeah, a founder, 1 operations officer, and a people officer.
Okay. And then how big is the company now?
We are at 150.
Wow, that is really
Yeah.
interesting.
No, and it works. You have to be transparent about the goals, and you have to, everybody knows what we are working on, what the goals are for this year, what the blockers can be. We communicate and we share those, and then people just need to know what needs to be done. And they do.
Do you have so you mentioned some people left because they felt like they wanted to progress or become a manager or something like that. And in some cases they came back. Do you ever get feedback that individuals aren't getting enough development? Does it really lean towards much more senior individual contributors in general? Because in the vast majority of companies that we talk to every day, the biggest pain point that employees have is career advancement, development, coaching, like how are they evolving? So without a manager, how does that happen?
Yeah, so I think what is interesting is we measure employee engagement, and one of the things that is mentioned is, yes, growth is limited in title, but there is no limitation. There is nobody holding you back if you want to explore something new or want to align with another team about a topic. So their growth is not stopping you from developing as a professional. But what they do lack a bit, and what is mentioned, is recognition. So where a manager is really the person to tap you on the shoulder, give that compliment, and maybe it's also not Dutch to do it.
Yeah.
Right. But that's what sometimes people are lacking, the recognition of a manager. Because, yeah, the management team with only 3, we cannot do that. But people really start to feel, but it always takes a while, that they really see it's not about the title, but it's really about, I'm doing today something completely different and new from what I did a year ago. I'm at a different level. I can manage more complex tasks or new tasks, or I'm better at conversations. So you do, but you have to, of course, emphasize on that growth in the role.
Do you have, from a leveling perspective, because you just mentioned someone who has grown or at a different level, is that recognized in terms of compensation or progression, since it isn't necessarily a title promotion? And that's something that we at Pando advocate a lot for anyway, is adding more levels so that you can focus employees on progressing, not title chasing. And maybe that comes with smaller pay increases, but it's also more aligned to scope. So do you have more structure in your levels, or how does that technically work, I guess?
Yeah, so we combined all levels. Junior, medium, senior, expert is not a title you can get. It's one and the same role. You're
an engineer and
engineer.
That's it.
That's it. But we do look in for salary scales. We benchmark, and then we look, of course, in what is paid in the market. And then it includes even the expert levels. So the salary scale is really big. And when you start, we give you a salary and you increase twice a year based on your performance review that is done by your peers. You can start to grow in salary. But we always say that we benchmark and make sure that we pay 50 to 70 percentile of the market. It can never be about salary that you are stuck or that you want to stick with numbers. We already have the 4-day work week.
Yeah.
It's already interesting enough. So it cannot be about salary. It's nice, but it cannot be the incentive to stay.
Is not to stick on salary for very much longer. I promise I'll move off it because I imagine that other companies will be thinking about how they can practically implement a program like this or a structure like this. And when you have all people in one role in one band that's very, very wide, how do you ensure equity, or with pay transparency, how are you going to answer to questions, I guess, that come up?
Yeah, so twice a year we have this round where we do the reviews, and based on that, people get the salary increase, and that is based upon available budget.
Yeah.
And that's also when the HR team really looks at all the salaries, how are people compared to each other, what other feedback did we receive. Maybe somebody falls behind because we hired a lot of new people from the market, fresh, with a higher income. So HR gives advice about that salary increase and maybe some changes, but also people themselves are invited to bring in a case. So if they feel and they can really showcase that they are paid too low, if that happens, they can bring in the case and we look at it.
Okay.
And we can align. Yeah.
Interesting. And you mentioned that was something, because we talked about feedback a little bit, recognition, and then of course, performance reviews are traditionally, maybe you have some 360 feedback, but a manager is doing a performance review with their individual employee and then having these calibration conversations. So can you explain how your performance review process works?
Yeah, it's 7 peers from your daily squad, but also a few from chapters that you work with. They have to do your performance review twice a year. So it's really short cycles in the end. And you do your own review there as well. And yeah, that's also how you see if you need to work on something, where you need to pay more attention, or where you are seen as a rock star and you should share maybe more. So that's really about the feedback. Also that you get there, and if there is anything that stands out, so if somebody is a low performer or an overperformer, the HR team will look at that. And we also have coaches, and they will also always ask in their head, twice a year they have a meeting with you, always the coaches, and they will also always ask about this review. What was the feedback that you got? What was your score? What do you want to do with this?
So are the scores averaged out, or how does that work? Does everybody give a score to each other?
Yeah, so we have a 5-point scale, and you just score where everybody stands in that sense. Are they performing under or overperforming? And then you get this average that is also directly connected to the pay increase that you get, the percentage. Yeah, and if you really feel that it should have been more or you are behind, then you can, of course, open up that case. But it's really nice because you have the feedback from your peers already. So sometimes also the peers will say, wow, you've outgrown yourself, or you've amazed, or yeah, if this was not your half year, then you can also really use that information to bring in the case.
Okay. I like that there's an opportunity for salary, because there's a lot of things that I like about this model, but I'm also like, wait, without the structure and specific levels and all of this, it's hard to wrap your head around how it works. But it sounds like you have this peer consensus feedback every 6 months, and it's just averaged out. So it doesn't matter if people are more senior or more junior or whatever, it just averages out based on that. Does it lean positive? Do you lean towards high performance?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and we are fine with that. We really feel that as long as you put in the comments why you score on questions like has this person learned a lot of new things? If you then just score a 5, you really need to tell them why or what have you seen.
Yeah.
because you have to explain it. So it can be also useful for a person to
For
see.
sure.
Yeah, that's essential.
Okay, and you have, because you just mentioned, did they learn new things as an example? So are there multiple questions that all have ratings? And so the multiple questions each rated, and then there's an average, and then everyone's averages come together?
Yeah.
Okay, I like the multiple questions being rated also. That's something that we advocate for. So it's a little bit more structured, at least in where you have strengths and where you can develop. Is it true then that people can get pay increases twice a year as well?
Yeah,
It's
twice a
not
year.
like if you got it in the first one, that doesn't disqualify you from the second one.
Now it's smaller steps twice a
Yeah,
year.
okay, cool.
Yeah.
I really like that because I do feel like it's a win-win if people are aligned and focused and progressing in a way that's getting business outcomes, then having this kind of continuous, there is recognition in having a pay increase as well, but you also feel like it's attached to a progression, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
100%.
I think that's really fascinating. Okay, so let's shift gears, I think, into 4-day work week. So it sounds like teams, at least with the no manager context, do well and are generally performing. If someone isn't performing, I guess, actually, let's talk about that really quick before we jump to 4-day work week, because I'm like, wait.
Yeah,
So if
wait.
they're
Okay.
not performing, this is peer based. So how are those, like, how do you handle that? Is that through the coach or somebody on the team, or is that your team? Who deals with that?
Yeah, my team indeed would be the one to go to. The
Okay.
coach would help solve it, of course, because the coach is independent, which is also really nice. But it is up to your peers to say, hey, you're slipping or we don't see you a lot anymore. So they need to make this call, either reach out to the person or to HR
Yeah.
and ask them for help. And yeah, hopefully not wait until the next review round because then 6 months can be too long. But we also have these retrospectives and we have these daily stand-ups. So those, because we
There's a
have
lot of
this,
cadences.
yeah, yeah. So
Because you
if
mentioned
someone,
squad, so you have like small groups of people that are core, but they also exchange out at different times depending on the projects or initiatives.
yeah, exactly. We have the agile organizational structure with squads on the multidisciplinary squads that work on a certain product or market. And we have the chapters that are one discipline. So all the salespeople, all the QAs, all the developers, they sit together and then they tackle topics like security or a new marketing tool.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And I've worked with CEOs in the past who really wanted to get to that, but it's a lot harder if you're already 150 or 200 employees to drive that change management. But I think that inflection point that you mentioned earlier, when you have the decision to hire a manager or not, is a good time to make a decision of how the organizational structure is going to look like, because that's typically where you tend to start adding in layers and structure that maybe you're going to try to take out at some point later and then have to manage that change.
Yeah, yeah. We hire people that fit this organizational model. So they
Yeah,
have a leadership skill in them. They
right.
are professional, autonomous. Upon hiring, they fit the model. If you change, yeah, you have probably a bunch of people that have always worked with a manager above them. So before you have changed that behavior, yeah, it's going to take 2, 3 years easily.
Yeah, indeed. All right. Okay, so now let's shift to 4-day work week. I think this was definitely a kind of trendy topic over the last couple of years. And then, of course, COVID and remote work and distributed teams and so many things. We're all juggling a lot of different things that we should be focused on or implementing. And I guess, have you always had that as well? Is this something that you evolved into? It sounds like the no manager thing was a pretty early decision. So when did the 4-day work week come in?
That came in 3 years ago when we were also looking at like how do we get back to the office because people stayed home
Mm.
and we don't want to tell them what to do because that's not our philosophy. But we felt a bit that we lost flow and rhythm because of the work from home trend. And we felt that that's
Post-COVID, you were trying to
yeah,
figure out, okay, how do we
yeah,
get
and we were
back into
looking
the
at
groove?
Exactly. So we
Okay.
were also like everyone looking at, okay, we need to get people to the office. And we were saying that just once and already immediately felt like that is not our problem. It's not about being in the office because we already had distributed teams already in Lisbon and Amsterdam. So it was not about sitting next to each other in the same space, but it was about the time. And people at home were also running errands, going to the
Mm.
gym. They were doing other things. So other people had to wait for them. This was what went wrong. And we acknowledge that there is an imbalance between work and life and that people do need to run errands and do need to go to the gym. And they also need to make time for training and personal development and volunteering and taking care of a household. So we felt like we have to provide that, but we have to organize it the same way we are super strict organized in this agile model. We also just have to organize this personal need
Yeah.
for more time. So we decided to allocate that on a Friday and make sure that everything else fits Monday to Thursday, really in working hours. We are then working hard together, available, and on Friday they can do whatever.
I think it's a really good point in terms of the schedule mix, match, and lineup. And I think that was a big challenge. And as distributed work has become more popular, you have round the clock collaboration, which can also be really challenging. And you don't have that, luckily, because you're all relatively in the same time zone.
Yeah.
But I think you have doctor's appointments, you have all kinds of stuff that people need to do. So I think it's interesting just to say, okay, it's gonna happen, and if it does, let's make it Friday. Or is that the day that you have off, or what day do you have off?
Friday is off. Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
like a long weekend or start of the weekend or whatever. So you have no meetings, you can work on personal projects, run errands, do your thing, which is likely going to happen no matter what anyway. So there is that kind of absent time regardless.
Especially Friday afternoons was already messy.
Yeah.
I didn't think
Yeah.
people were really working, but what you see now is also Monday mornings. People were starting late because they were still tired or getting out of the weekend rhythm into the work rhythm again. And now you see that people are they are on Monday
Yeah.
morning ready to go.
So do you feel like there's a strong commitment from employees then, it sounds like, to it's a trade-off that they know the company is taking, and therefore they're like extra committed in those 4 days to show up and be present and be fully productive?
Yeah, it's definitely, it's mental, even for me, knowing that next Friday again, I have all this time available for me to do all these things that are otherwise bothering me.
Yeah.
That interesting what it does to a person. And yeah, playing with that helps. And people are really now focused on work because all these things that you remind yourself, like, oh, I need to buy this gift, I need to clean up, I need to take this to whatever charity. Everything
Always have a day to do it.
you have a day to do it soon, right?
Yeah.
It is within or by the end of the week.
Yeah.
It will be off your list, and that gives
Sure.
peace. And that is what you need to have a little less stress when you are on the work floor, if you are in a meeting.
Was there a lot of adaptation? Did people struggle with it, or was it pretty easy to implement? Did it take a while?
It's like 3 months before people really started to do something significant with the Friday. So the first weekends, people were just having 3 days off instead of two.
Yeah.
But only after 3 months, people really started to sign up for trainings, gym memberships, volunteering. And that really also pays off. You do something significant on that Friday. For the 4 days, it was the same. In the beginning, you can prepare so much, thinking about what processes can be smarter, what meetings can we take out. But only if you're really doing it and you have that push and that drive to really be critical, you can decide, oh, we don't need all to go to the meeting, or we can, instead of a meeting, just do it in a Jira page and keep track of progress there and use more tools. So that took, I think, even 6 months or so to really get all those benefits actually in.
Because they're now considering, okay, I only have 4 days, so do I really even am I going to participate in this meeting? Will I say anything? Can I do it async? And they want to stay more focused. So that's super cool. I assume compensation or benefits didn't change
No.
about this, did it?
No, so we get the 5 days. It's still the same salary. And like I said before, we are not the best payer in the market, but we are at 50 to 70 percentile. That's what we are really aiming for. But then it gets attractive, of course.
For sure.
It's working 80%, paid 100.
So you mentioned kind of making the decision about no managers when you were around 50, and then this decision came several years ago. I guess what has been the result? Because you've obviously grown as an organization because you've gone from 50 to 150 employees, and I assume the business is doing decent if that's the case. So what are some of the results that you saw, and maybe what were a couple of the things that you were surprised by about the outcome?
Yeah, the outcome is really everything you can expect. So if you are more rested, you have less issues with colleagues. You make less mistakes. You don't get, or you get sick still, but working from home and that 1 day extra of rest makes sickness absence is lower. I think people are staying longer at Nmbrs because they can now start with their hobby or that project that you always wanted to do when you are retired. That's something you can already pick up now, playing piano, doing arts. So you really see people, they are staying longer, they are less sick, they are more innovative, they are rested, less issues. And after a while, you really see that building and building up to a higher performance.
Mhm.
And we do measure everything because every year we are working with this SaaS rule of 40, and we constantly grow with 20 plus percent. We are not about hyper growth, but really steady growth. It's payroll, so we want to also have this that we are a secure player, a stable player. But you can really see how we continuously have managed that also after implementing this 4-day work week.
And from like a revenue perspective, have you seen higher revenue per employee type of numbers as you've grown
Yeah.
as well?
Yeah, and that's also what we measure, but we also measure code reds and blacks, the mistakes. We measure, of course, how people think about the product. So the PNPS, it is up. So that means probably that they appreciate innovation that we put into our tooling. Yeah, and ENPS went up, but it's over 80. So it's
very high.
It's extremely high. It's almost a cult. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I appreciate all of the context and the detail and the insight. I think it's really fascinating. I think a lot of what you've implemented aligns with how I've thought about the future of work and especially how we think about employees and their role and kind of this dynamic between manager and IC in general and how it's a fading paradigm. So I guess just as we wrap up, do you have any last advice for folks who are looking for disrupting some of their current systems, even if it's manager or maybe about the work week and what that looks like?
Yeah, my advice would be always check in with your people. If you really ask them and you give them the trust that you are really listening and really listening, what do they want? What do they think would be disrupting or could be helpful? Because I think people know so much more, but they are often not even asked.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It was really good to have this chat. Marieke, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. And I also enjoyed talking.